Having discussed the requirements for RTO and RPO, let's now look at this part about security risks. What are the security strategies or requirements for personnel? Firstly, for people, it is clear that is their origin, that is our recruitment has certain requirements. Then in candidate screening, that is in the recruitment process, whether it's HR or our security department's senior management or management personnel, background checks must be done first, because when the security department recruits people, they must first ensure that the person is safe and reliable. Here, what needs special attention is the criminal record. Strictly speaking, if there is a criminal record, we cannot participate in the recruitment of the security department. Like Gao Xiaosong, he definitely cannot work in the security department. If you have been imprisoned or have a record of detention, it's not quite suitable. Another one is the situation of employment interruption. We also need to ask, if you have worked in HR, you would know, generally speaking, HR considers 3 to 6 months, that is what we call the gap period in the workplace. 3 to 6 months is still acceptable, because when we look for a job, it takes about 3 months, 4 months to find a new job. This is possible, but if it exceeds half a year, it is worth doubting. What did this person do during the half-year gap? How did he maintain his life? What is the source of income? This is a certain risk. This is for background checks. Then another part, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, whether we leave actively or are dismissed, we need to sign this NDA and NCA at this place. That is what we call signing a confidentiality agreement and a non-compete agreement, because this is very important. If you are engaged in security positions, the confidentiality agreement you sign is really important. Another one, for the security department, it may involve some core assets of the enterprise, including some financial reports. It may come into contact with, because it's electronic, we also need to sign this non-compete agreement. So these two agreements are very important. And these two agreements should be signed at the time of recruitment. When you are dismissed, if you sign it at the time of dismissal, no one will sign with us. It should be signed at the time of recruitment. This is something everyone needs to understand. And when we sign a contract with an employee, we need to consider, for example, the requirements for ethics. Some companies, like some Western companies, they have requirements for gifts. They have requirements. The value of the gift cannot exceed a certain amount in US dollars, 50 US dollars, and they do not allow to accept gifts worth more than 30 US dollars, including what we mentioned earlier about NDA and NCA. It should be an attachment or part of the HR contract. Then after this person is recruited, next, we need to arrange positions. When arranging positions, there is an important point here, which is separation of duties. We have talked about separation of duties when we talked about CIA, because it mainly faces integrity, because one person should not have the ability to execute all steps of a specific process. If we are the law enforcers, executors, if we are also the referees at the same time, there is a problem here, because separation of duties, it can prevent collusion. Some students may have a question. Then teacher Koi, this for example, a process is done by only one person. Now I have 2 people doing it. It actually causes collusion. It's not understood this way. If we only have one person doing it, it's like we didn't even split the roles at all. This is something everyone needs to understand. This person actually does the work of many roles. This can lead to collusion. If we have already in the workflow, have broken down the entire work content into the work scope of several roles. In this case, in the execution process, for example, finance, accounting, and cashier, it can effectively prevent the control of money. Those who control the numbers do not control the money. Prevent this kind of stubborn collusion. So this is the logic. If you say these 2 people collude, that's another matter. It's their morality. That's really a recruitment issue. From the perspective of role definition, I definitely have two different roles. So, just now, we talked about the basis of responsibility separation. I target the requirements of each role or position. We are the least privileged, that is to say, for each role, we only assign the corresponding permissions to the corresponding role or position. He can only see what he should see, or he can only do what he should do. Make any changes, this is called least privilege. The least privilege is generally from a technical perspective. We can use access control lists can be achieved through this permission assignment, including through some. For example, like a Bastion host, I can limit him from a business perspective or from a management perspective. He should only know what he should know. This role should only know the information within his work scope. He can't see what's outside his work scope. So everyone understands this. The most typical is when handling counter business in a bank. We often find some processing. He may need the back office when making large transfers. He needs authorization to confirm. This is the logic. In addition to the position, in addition to the separation of responsibilities we just talked about, there is another one called job rotation. Job rotation refers to the same role or the same position, the same work role or the same position, after working for a few years. For example, many important positions in Huawei. He needs to be rotated after working for 3 years. Like the bosses of various offices, he might be rotated. It is to reduce collusion. Why can it reduce collusion? He can discover. Yes, he can discover some collusion or some dereliction of duty, because the logic is simple. For example, this person has been working in this position for 3 years, right? It's what we common people call preventing local snakes. Because of the ground relationship, including suppliers for a certain city, suppliers including customers are very familiar, then I transfer him. Some people say this actually affects business. Good companies are like this. It's like iron barracks and flowing soldiers. No matter how you deploy this person, but this business will not be lost. So this is used to discover collusion. The same logic. There is also mandatory vacation. Mandatory vacation. We generally write block leave in foreign companies. Block leave is generally a long vacation. For example, 5 days, 5 working days, or a longer time. I have a relative. In his job, their boss generally does not recommend short vacations. It's this kind of 1 or 2 days. I take this 15 days. For example, annual leave is given to him to take a break. He generally does not recommend it if he takes a break. You must ensure at least a week or a longer time, because during this time he can use the backup or butterfly role. See if he can take over. That is, the original position employee's work role. In this way, at the same time, through a period of work, I can find out what problems the previous person may have in his work. It can also make abnormal things surface. It is also used to discover collusion or discover problems. It is also used to detect collusion or identify issues. So, one is that separation of duties is used to prevent collusion and things like mandatory vacations. And the job rotation we just talked about are for detecting collusion. Everyone should know this, right? Because if you rotate jobs, it's definitely after the fact. You can't possibly prevent it in advance, right? But if you separate duties, you have already separated the roles in advance. So everyone should understand this. Then immediately following is what we also mentioned before. That is, when an employee leaves, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, they need to sign an NDA. One is to sign an NDA. Another important thing is what we said about revoking permissions first. Generally speaking, it's through account deactivation or something. That is, we lock the account. It's like freezing their account before they are fired or before they quit. The account within the system. Everyone, please note that you can't delete it because this account will have audit requirements in the future, right? We need to have a retrospective. It needs to have a 6-month log, but generally this account will be deactivated. This account is locked. They can't use it, but then go through the HR process. Otherwise, if you notify HR first, right? They might have a bad idea. They might damage the information system anyway. In addition, some jobs we might outsource to a third party, like our suppliers, some legal consultants, including some security consultants, and sometimes we can outsource some help desk work. In this case, generally please note that we can only use contracts for suppliers because it's like this. We can also sign an NDA with them. There's no problem signing an NDA with a third party, but it's hard to use security standards or security requirements to demand their logic because the third party is not our own company or people within our organization. It's unrealistic to use our company's security policy to demand them. It's better to use a contract with them, right? Because a contract is a legal obligation between both parties. That's simpler. What you do, I give you what. If you can't do it, I won't give you the corresponding reward. I might even have an economic compensation for them. So this is the best way to manage suppliers. Everyone should note this. It's a bit different from managing our own people. In addition, there's another part. That is privacy. Actually, we have talked about privacy before. From an individual's perspective, we need to protect our own privacy. But from a company's perspective, generally, we will sign a privacy policy with customers. Because when we sign a privacy policy with our customers, there are some legal or risk disclaimers here. It's like our customers authorizing us to collect and use their potential privacy or personal information. In this way, you can avoid some unnecessary legal responsibilities. Of course, it's still this sword. If you look at it from different directions, the angle might be different. Everyone understands this. If it's from the company's perspective, I need to avoid the legal risks that my customers bring to me. But from the customer's perspective or from an individual's perspective, I also need to prevent my personal privacy from being used or collected more by some commercial organizations. So it makes sense either way, but everyone needs to abide by certain rules and ways of playing.